Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
I was pouring gravy when my brother whispered to his wife, "Everyone thinks she's just a leech." He didn't know I was right behind him, didn't know I'd paused mid-step, clutching the ladle in one hand and a dish towel in the other, heart suddenly thudding like a dropped ornament. It wasn't loud, the way he said it. It wasn't cruel, even. That made it worse. He said it like it was a fact. Like he was reminding her that yes, this was the burden they bore this holiday season, letting the family parasites sit at their table, sleep under their roof, share their wine. I didn't drop the gravy. I didn't say a word. I let the silence swallow me, and I turned back into the dining room, face smooth like untouched snow, smile fixed with practiced precision. I finished pouring the gravy, passed the bowl to his daughter, and listened to the clink of silverware and the low hum of Christmas music from the Bluetooth speaker tucked behind the garland on the mantel. No one else knew what I'd just heard. They didn't notice anything had shifted. But inside, I'd gone very still. That's the thing about families like ours. We pretend until we bleed from the mouth. We smile through every insult, every passive-aggressive jab disguised as a joke. And we gather like clockwork year after year, thinking that if we sing enough carols and wear enough matching pajamas, we can pretend nothing's broken. But it is broken. It's always been broken. Only now, I couldn't keep pretending. My name is Lacey. I'm 34. I've been living above my brother's garage for the past 2 years. And I want to say something very clearly. I didn't ask for any of this. It started after I lost my job, marketing assistant for a mid-sized logistics firm in Des Moines. I wasn't fired, just reduced, downsized. One of those words that companies use to make sure you don't collect bitterness along with your severance. Around the same time, I shattered my left ankle in a stupid fall outside my apartment building. A pile of slick November leaves, a forgotten step, a bad break. Surgery, no insurance, and rent due. Andrew, my older brother, the golden boy, the one who went to Northwestern and married a dentist and owned not one but 2 rental properties, said I could move in just until I get back on my feet. I remember that exact phrase because I laughed through tears at the irony. At first, it was okay. We were polite. His wife, Melanie, smiled with just enough warmth to make me think she meant it. I picked up his daughter from school a few times a week, cooked when I could, took care of the house when they traveled, paid what little rent I could manage, $200 a month, barely covering the electricity I used, he joked. But now, 2 years in, apparently everyone thought I was a leech. That night, the Christmas tree glowed like something out of a Hallmark movie. Red and gold ornaments, ribbon wrapped in spirals, a perfect facade. I sat at the table next to their daughter, Emma, who showed me the bracelet she'd made me. I thanked her like nothing was wrong, because how could I look a 9-year-old in the face with the truth? That her dad thought I was a joke. We played cards after dinner, drank cheap wine, and laughed at movies we'd seen 10 times. I noticed how Melanie didn't make eye contact, how Andrew didn't refill my glass, how his voice turned just a touch sharper every time he said my name. Maybe I'd missed it before. Maybe I hadn't wanted to see it. But it was all there, like dust you only notice when the light hits it right. Later, I stood in the guest bathroom, staring into the mirror, repeating the sentence in my head like a chant. Everyone thinks you're just a leech. The words slid down my spine, burrowed into my gut. I kept asking myself, who's everyone? Mom's gone. Dad died 5 years ago. It's just us and the cousins we see once in a blue moon. So did he mean his wife? His friends? Emma? Or was that just his own voice echoed back with pretend consensus? It didn't matter. The damage was done. I climbed the stairs to the garage apartment just after midnight. They didn't notice I left early. They didn't call after me. In my room, my little overdecorated prison, I sat on the edge of the pull-out bed and looked around at the stacks of self-help books and unopened Christmas cards from temp agencies. It was all so damn pathetic. I wasn't proud of where I'd landed, but I wasn't some helpless sponge either. I'd helped them more than they ever acknowledged. Took care of their daughter when they were too busy working or fighting or both. Stocked their pantry when Melanie forgot. Listened when Andrew needed to vent about his idiot employees. But none of that counted. People like Andrew don't keep score until it benefits them. And now I had a decision to make. I sat there in the dark, only the blinking lights from across the street slipping through the blinds. Somewhere below, I could hear them moving around in the kitchen. A cabinet closing. The faucet running. Dishes being stacked. Domestic peace humming along like I hadn't just heard the ugliest thing I'd ever heard from the person who once swore he'd always protect me. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth, the way they taught me in physical therapy when the pain got bad. Only this wasn't pain in my ankle. This was deeper, hotter, older. And it whispered something back to me. You don't owe them a damn thing anymore. By the time I crawled into bed, the plan was already taking shape. I didn't know all the details yet, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let them keep thinking I needed them more than they needed me. And that account Andrew had forgotten about? He'd remember it soon enough. The thing about betrayal is that it never happens the way you expect. It doesn't show up loud or obvious, dressed in red flags and fireworks. No, it creeps in dressed as generosity, comfort, and warmth. It borrows your blanket and hands you soup when you're sick. It tucks you in and reminds you how lucky you are. I used to believe that my brother's offer, the apartment above his garage, that until you're back on your feet line, was an act of kindness. But now I know better. It wasn't kindness. It was credit. A loan with silent interest that collected daily, stored up for moments like this, when the debt could be called in with a whisper. I sat on the edge of that pull-out bed, still in my sweater from Christmas Eve, and I thought about the night I moved in. It was raining, that cold, sideways kind of rain that hits you in the neck no matter how tight your hood is. My lease had ended, I couldn't afford a new place, and Andrew said, "You'd be doing us a favor, actually. We need someone around the house with Emma since we're both swamped." I remember feeling relief so thick it felt like honey. I even brought over my cast iron skillet and 3 boxes of old college books, thinking I'd be there maybe 3 months. That was 2 Christmases ago. And I did help. Every damn day. I walked Emma to school in sub-zero Iowa mornings when Melanie had a dentist conference in Omaha. I scrubbed their kitchen floor on my hands and knees when their cleaner canceled. I sat with Andrew the night Melanie left him for a week and called him a disconnected, emotionless bastard, his words, not mine. I listened to every complaint, every work rant, every passive sigh about how nobody understands how hard it is to run a household. I understood. I was living in it. Quietly. Without fanfare. Without thanks. And still, I paid rent. They said the rent was only $500 a year, but I was still paying him $50 every month. I know that math doesn't check out. Feel free to point it out. My brother sure didn't. He took the cash in a folded envelope and never once asked if I had enough to buy groceries. Because he assumed I didn't, and that was easier to mock than admit. That Christmas morning was the first one I didn't want to come downstairs. I heard Emma giggling from the living room as early as 6:30. I waited until 8. I made sure my face looked relaxed and my hair covered the pillow crease on my cheek. I pulled on the reindeer slippers Melanie bought me last year, the same ones with a loose eye that Emma had sewn back on with red thread. Somehow, that eye now stared at me like it knew something I didn't. The living room was already a mess of shredded wrapping paper and tissue when I stepped in. Emma ran up and hugged me, warm and sweet, like kids are before they learn how the world really works. I asked what Santa brought her. She squealed about a drone and roller skates and a real instant camera. Andrew laughed from the couch, holding coffee in the mug I gave him last year, a ceramic thing with "World's Okayest Brother" in faded letters. He didn't look up when I sat down. Melanie smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. There was a small stack of gifts left under the tree. I waited. One by one, they opened everything. Socks, books, gift cards, perfume. The pile dwindled. Eventually, it was just the empty paper left, and nothing for me. Not a candle. Not a card. Not even one of Emma's drawings. I know how that sounds. Petty. Childish. But it wasn't about the gift. It was about the message. Loud and clear. You're not part of this. I helped clean up. I washed the dishes. I smiled through the morning like someone watching their own funeral in a dream. At one point, Emma asked Aunt Lacey, "Where's your present?" And Andrew chuckled and said, "I think your hugs are her present this year." I forced a laugh. Melanie didn't even glance up from her phone. That was when I knew this wasn't home. This wasn't family. This was shelter. And shelter, in their eyes, made me a burden. After brunch, I slipped away. Said I needed air. I walked back up the side steps to the apartment, grabbed my duffel from the closet, and packed fast. I didn't have a clear plan. I didn't even know where I was going. But I knew I wasn't staying another night under this roof. I zipped the bag shut with one hand and pulled out the envelope I kept hidden behind the heater, a few $100s I'd saved from temp work. Just enough for gas and maybe a week somewhere cheap. Before I walked out, I glanced around one last time. The little photos I'd pinned to the wall. The tea kettle I'd bought from a thrift shop. The folded notes from Emma, now yellowed on the fridge. I felt something between heartbreak and rage. And then it passed. Like steam off glass. Downstairs, they didn't even notice I was gone. They were too busy taking selfies in front of the tree. Let's see how they like living without their little Leech. The thing about family money, and I mean real family money, the kind that comes wrapped in grief and guilt, is that it always carries a smell, even when you think it's clean. After our mom died, the only thing Andrew and I agreed on without fighting was that the funeral needed to be paid for fast, and we didn't want probate lawyers crawling all over every dollar she left behind. So we opened a joint account, one of those temporary, functional things you tell yourself will be gone in a month. We each put in a few thousand. He fronted more because he could. I promised to make up my half when I could, and he waved it off like it wasn't a big deal. We used it for the service. Flowers, casket, burial plot, the whole gut-wrenching mess. I still remember standing in the bank parking lot with him afterward, holding that little receipt like it meant something, like it was proof we were still a team, even after burying the only woman who ever treated us both like we mattered equally. I said, "Should we close it?" And he said, "Let's leave it open for now, just in case something else comes up." And something always came up. He started using the account for shared expenses, which somehow included a tax deduction donation to his high school alumni fund, new brakes on the SUV I occasionally drove Emma in, and a payment to a financial advisor who only ever called him. I let it go. At the time, I still believed he meant well, that he was just bad at boundaries, not manipulative. He was handling things, and I was too tired to question it. I had access, technically. I could see the statements if I wanted. But I didn't look too closely. Because when you don't want to see the truth, you'll squint hard enough to make it blurry. But now that I was halfway down I-80 westbound, windshield wipers ticking in slow rhythm and a duffel bag stuffed with every piece of clothing I owned in the backseat, now I wasn't squinting. I was seeing everything with absolute clarity. I pulled into a rest stop somewhere near Newton, Iowa, one of those sad little places with flickering vending machines and a payphone that probably hadn't worked since Obama's first term, and I opened the banking app. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. It felt like finally breathing after holding it in too long. The login still worked. The balance blinked on screen like a dare. $8,467.13. That was more than I expected. Probably some miscellaneous business expense reimbursements had filtered through it, thinking I'd never notice or care. And he was right, I hadn't. Not until he made me care. Not until he opened his mouth on Christmas Eve and told his wife I was a leech. That one word cracked open every dusty drawer of memory I'd locked tight. Suddenly, I was seeing all of it. Every time he sighed when I needed a ride. Every time he reminded me how lucky I was to have a roof over my head. Every joke about freeloading artists at dinner, even though he knew I hadn't painted in years. Every sideways glance Melanie gave when I added cheaper coffee to the grocery list. I let them have all of it because I thought love was measured in how much you could overlook. But I was done overlooking. I transferred the full balance into my own personal account, one I opened quietly a year ago when I briefly worked the register at a co-op market downtown. I never told anyone I kept it open. I told myself it was for emergencies. Well, what's more of an emergency than escaping a family that sees your entire existence as a favor they regret granting? The confirmation screen popped up. Transfer successful. I logged out, sat back, and stared at the rain running down the windshield like a stream I couldn't wade through fast enough. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then I felt something very close to peace. I blocked his number without ceremony. No dramatic goodbye, no righteous explanation. He didn't deserve my anger. Anger still means you care. Indifference is the real ending. Back on the highway, the wind had picked up, and I could feel the little sedan sway in the gusts. I didn't know where I was going yet. Maybe west, maybe nowhere. But it didn't matter. Because for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't walking on eggshells above someone else's house. I wasn't asking permission to exist. I wasn't collecting smiles like tips to earn another day of grace. When my phone buzzed around 10:30, I ignored it. Same at 10:45. At 11:15, I pulled into a gas station, filled the tank with shaking fingers, not from fear, but adrenaline, and checked the screen. 5 missed calls. All from Andrew. No voicemails. Just that pathetic, repeated red bar. And then finally, a text. What the hell did you do? I laughed out loud in the parking lot, standing under the flickering glow of a sign that promised hot dogs and bad coffee. I grinned so hard it hurt. What did I do? I just balanced the damn scales. The real storm didn't start until the 3rd day, after the shock wore off, after he realized I wasn't just ignoring his calls, but deliberately refusing to play the part he'd written for me. He had always been the kind of man who needed to be in control, even when he called it helping. Andrew didn't give without keeping the receipt in his back pocket, ready to pull out whenever he wanted to remind you how generous he was. And now that I had walked away and taken something he thought was his to manage forever, the mask came off fast and hard. The first message came in at 6:30 in the morning. An unfamiliar number with a text that read, "We need to talk." This isn't funny. No name, no punctuation, just that dry, clipped tone I could hear in his voice even without a voicemail. 5 minutes later, the same number again. This time a missed call. Then another. Then a different number. I blocked each one like I was swatting flies. By the time the gas station clerk handed me my change, I'd blocked 4 numbers and counted 3 voicemails, none of which I planned to open. By noon, it moved to email. The subject line was just my name, full name, first and last, like I was a client who'd violated a contract. The message was longer than I expected, but every word bled the same 3 emotions: betrayal, self-righteousness, and panic. He said I blindsided him, said I violated the only thing left between us. He actually typed the words, "This is theft, Lacey," like I was some stranger who walked in off the street and picked his pocket, not the woman who helped bury our mother and then spent 2 years washing his dishes and raising his kid while he played executive martyr. I didn't reply. Not right away. I made coffee instead. I sat in the little motel off Route 6 that smelled like mildew and cleaning bleach, staring out at the winter gray sky, and I sipped that watery cup like it was champagne. Because I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I also knew I had already won. He was scrambling because he never imagined I'd do it. Not just take the money, but leave without asking, without groveling, without performing the guilt he was so used to seeing in my eyes every time he tilted the scale in his favor. Andrew didn't just want control of my bank account. He wanted control of my shame. And that was gone now. Around 3 o'clock, I got the email with the subject line, I've spoken to the bank. That one made me laugh out loud. He actually thought the bank was going to punish me for accessing a joint account with my name on it, one we'd both legally had access to for almost 3 years. I took screenshots of the documents, pulled up the initial confirmation email with both our names listed as account holders, and drafted my reply with a calm I didn't even recognize in myself. I wrote, "Hi, Andrew. The account was legally joint. I transferred funds I was entitled to. I've kept records of every transaction and your permission over the years. You're free to speak to anyone you like. But please don't mistake my silence for fear. I took what I was owed. You can tell everyone your leech grew a spine." I read it 3 times before hitting send. Then I shut the laptop, leaned back, and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket I hadn't known I needed. But of course, he couldn't stop there. That evening, I saw it. The Facebook post. Not from Andrew, but from Melanie. Her account, profile picture of her and Emma at the beach, smiling like a family frozen in amber. The post said, "Family always shows their true colors, especially when money's involved." No names, no direct tags, but everyone knew. The comments rolled in like thunderclouds, people I hadn't heard from in years, piping up with the digital equivalent of popcorn in hand. One cousin wrote, "Damn, what happened?" Another, "Y'all good." And my personal favorite from a high school friend of Melanie's, "Some people really do bite the hand that feeds them." I didn't respond. I didn't like it, didn't comment, didn't message anyone. Because what none of them knew was that for the past 2 years, Andrew had slowly, methodically made sure I couldn't stand without leaning on him. My car? In his name. The insurance? Under his household account. Every time I tried to talk about getting back on my feet, he made sure to remind me that the world was hard and I was lucky not to be out in it alone. Every time I bought groceries for the house with my own money, he'd say something like, "You didn't need to do that," but never reimburse me. Just log it somewhere in that mental tally he kept, the one where every favor he did got interest and every favor I did was invisible. He was always playing both roles, the saint and the scorekeeper. And the truth was, I let him. For too long. Because I didn't want to believe he'd turned into our father, that slow, cruel kind of man who hid his bitterness under civility and called it family duty. But now I saw it, clearer than ever. I wasn't the leech. I was the leash. And now he was choking without it. I scrolled through the comments one more time. Someone had written, "Blood's thicker than water, but money will always tell the truth." I clicked like, because for once it actually did. The first New Year's Eve I spent away from my family in over a decade was not glamorous, not wild, and not the kind of night you tell stories about later with a nostalgic grin and a champagne headache. It was cold, bitterly cold. The kind of Iowa cold that doesn't just bite your skin, it gets inside your teeth, your bones, your voice. I spent it in a borrowed hoodie behind the bar at a place called the Swill House, a dive with duct-taped bar stools, a broken jukebox that only played 80s rock, and a bartender named Jude who taught me how to pour shots while ignoring men who thought they were funny. I worked the closing shift, cleaned up puke in the women's room around 2:15, and walked home in silence with my gloves stiff with someone else's spilled whiskey. And I swear to you, I felt more free than I ever had in my life. Not rich. Not successful. Not on the rise like all those motivational podcasts say. But free. Utterly, wholly, peacefully free. The room I rented was barely larger than a pantry, twin mattress on the floor, a single window that looked out onto an alley full of trash cans and the occasional stray cat, and a hot plate that tripped the circuit breaker if I ran the microwave at the same time. But it was mine. The money in my account. Yes, the same account Andrew was probably still losing sleep over had paid for the first and last month's rent. I'd used some of it for a second-hand phone and a cheap laptop. The rest? Tucked away like a fire escape in case life burned down again. I knew what they were saying. I didn't have to check Facebook or call anyone to imagine it. I could picture Andrew telling our extended family some version of the story that made him look wounded, betrayed, shocked. Melanie probably had a rehearsed line. We opened our home to her, and this is how she repays us. I bet they left out the years of condescension. The meals I cooked when Melanie forgot to order groceries. The time I picked Emma up from school with the flu because both of them were in meetings. The birthday card I got from them last year with no note, just a scratchy love and a coffee shop gift card that had already been used. I remembered every humiliation, every small act that reminded me I was tolerated, not wanted. The time Andrew told me to maybe not wear that to his office's holiday party because my outfit, a black pantsuit I'd worn to job interviews, was a little sad. The day Melanie accidentally donated a box of my clothes thinking they were hers, including a jacket my mother had given me the winter before she died. She didn't apologize. She said, "Well, it's just stuff, right?" No, it was never just stuff. There was one more thing, though. Something I hadn't told anyone. Something I'd found purely by accident the year before, when Andrew asked me to organize his paperwork during tax season. I was trying to be helpful. I'd found a folder tucked inside a drawer labeled miscellaneous, receipts that included a 1099 under someone else's name. Not mine. Not Melanie's. A former employee, maybe. The income had been reported as a contractor expense, but the signature was forged. The number wasn't big, not enough to make headlines, but big enough to make problems if the IRS ever sniffed too closely. I'd made a copy, just in case. I didn't tell him. I didn't confront him. I didn't report him. I just folded it neatly, tucked it inside a manila envelope, and slid it under the lining of my suitcase. The same suitcase I carried out of his house the morning after Christmas, while he was too busy posting festive family pictures to notice I was gone for good. That envelope still lives in the bottom drawer of my new room, next to the spare key and the prepaid SIM card. I don't look at it much. I don't need to. Just knowing it's there is enough. Because that's the thing about leverage, it doesn't work if you're desperate to use it. It works best when you're willing to wait. Sometimes I wonder if he knows. If he suspects I know something. If his accountant is asking questions. If he's sweating a little when April rolls around. If he's wondering whether the leech he thought he was feeding might be the one holding the knife to the branch. I haven't answered any of his new messages. The last ones came from an anonymous number, maybe Melanie, maybe some cousin roped in to mediate. I read them once, then deleted them. I don't owe anyone my side of the story. Let them tell theirs. Let them shape it however they need to so they can sleep at night. But deep down they know. They all do. I'm not a thief. I'm not a liar. I'm not some couch-crashing burnout who took advantage of my brother's generosity. I was a sister who kept their secrets, even when they didn't deserve it. He always thought I needed him. But maybe, just maybe, he was the one who needed me. Guess we'll find out next tax season.